All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Scot Cohen. I'm a performance coach. I'm here with Dr. Scot Seitz, a clinical psychologist and licensed practicing therapist. Scott, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Yeah. Excited to be here and talk about avoidance.
Yes, avoidance is our topic. So, we wanted to really start tackling topics that are super relevant to people in today's world, both from a coaching side and from a therapist side. And so, Scott brings a wealth of knowledge from psychology with him. I come from a performance coaching background. And so, we really want to dive into this idea of avoidance. And um, in a nutshell, that feeling when you're avoiding doing things that you know you either want to do or need to do. So, we're going to talk a little bit about it in the personal realm, when you're trying to start new hobbies or change habits. We'll talk a little bit about in the relationship realm. So when you're kind of avoiding things with a partner or somebody you're intimate with. And then we'll also touch on the career realm. So when you might be avoiding doing things in the workplace, or taking chances in your career that could be preventing you from making the progress that you're really seeking. And we'll try to close out with just giving you a few high level strategies about how we tend to recommend folks attack avoidance head on, and we'll see where we go from there. So let's dig in first. So Scott, I'd love for you to tell our audience here, at a high level in your field, define avoidance for us and kind of contextualize it in what you've seen.
Yeah. So I often like to start with thinking about short term versus long term. So avoidance for me, and when it can be really problematic, is when we are avoiding distressing or uncomfortable feelings that are in the short term, temporary stuff. So for instance, I have at many points in my life had the goal of building more muscle, weightlifting,
Sure.
but there are these short-term feelings that will come up for me that really prevent me from achieving that longer-term goal of getting to the gym, trying to lift weights. So as an example, just like me being very scrawny and feeling embarrassed when I'm in a gym setting around all these other guys who are like lifting really, really huge weights,
Right.
that short-term embarrassment or even the fear of that often prevents me from even doing the thing that's going to get me the long-term outcome, which is, being stronger. So that's how I like to think about avoidance. Are there these short-term feelings that I'm avoiding that have a high cost, and that cost is me not reaching my longer-term goals?
Yeah, yeah. Versus the short term perceived cost, which is feeling embarrassed or feeling silly or dumb. I know a similar story back when I was a teacher. We had a student in our school who was literally a world talent when it came to track and field, and he had never lifted once before. And so he was just pure talent, but he never went into the weight room. And to be a professional, you have to lift weights, you have to get stronger. And I remember him telling his coach that he didn't want to go in because he was embarrassed being around the football players who were stronger, used to lifting. And this is a guy who had won second in the world championships. And so that fear of what others are going to think about you, that strikes us all. That's a huge part of it. And part of it is also something I see a lot is a fear of the unknown, right? It's when you kind of step out of that comfort zone, and you want to pick up a new hobby or build a new skill, or you want to go after somebody new or say something that you've been holding back. It's not knowing what that experience is going to be like, and out of a protective instinct, we prevent ourselves from doing it and we put it off, right? It's a lot of times it's putting it off, which is sort of an escape valve. It's like, oh no, it's not that I'm never going to do it, it's that I'm going to do it later, right? I'm going to do it when I'm ready, or when I'm motivated, or when I've learned enough, or when I've spent enough money on stuff to get me prepared. That's something I love to do, is just spend money on supplies for stuff but not actually do the thing.
Yeah.
And so let's break this down into three buckets. So let's start with the personal level. So things that we're trying to do for ourselves. It could be a new habit, behaviors, hobbies. It could just be like sort of mental routines we have. What are some examples, or some ways you think about and approach avoidance on the personal level? Someone who's trying to improve themselves or try something new.
Yeah, I think this comes up all the time for us, even with something that probably many of us can relate to when it comes to like eating healthier. Um, there are short-term uh, emotions, let's say, that we avoid. So I know one for me is often like that, hey, I've tried this before. I've tried to eat healthier and it doesn't work. I think an added piece to this is a lot of us experience the phenomenon of trying to eat away our distress. So we're
Mm.
feeling uncomfortable. So one way to avoid that distress is we just eat
Yeah, it's
some of
comfort food, right? That's where that
our
comes from.
food.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So in that way, it's kind of working in the reverse where we're seeking that short-term relief, that short-term comfort, and so we eat more, and then it, of course, counteracts our goal of eating healthier.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and at a brain level, we know that the science has shown this, right? That every time, so I'm a big sweets guy, so is my fiance. We both love sweets, we love desserts, but it's definitely like a comfort food too. And what happens is, your brain starts building these dopamine responses to these short term, in this case, sugar rushes, and it's like, oh yes, I've treated myself and I've made myself feel better, something for me. But to your point, it's like I'm still delaying maybe a long-term vision for myself that I have, because I'm not feeling right in the moment. But that short-term decision just pushes off the long-term transformation that I'm really looking for. This happens all the time with habits and hobbies, right? I know a lot of people want to pick up a new hobby, and it's like, how do you find the energy at the end of a long day at work when maybe you're not as inspired, to pick up something new at night when you've got your routine? I like to sit and I like to watch Netflix. I've got like a couple shows that come on, and it's like, how do you break out of that? Is one of the biggest challenges, because it's so much easier to avoiding. Avoiding is the default, right? By doing nothing, you're avoiding, which means you literally don't have to do anything to accomplish avoidance, right? That's what makes it so devilish of a thing to get over, right?
yes, absolutely. Should we talk a little bit about the interpersonal realm too?
Yeah, yeah. I This is maybe the thing that resonates most for me, is, so on the personal front, we're talking about how it might prevent you from pushing yourself out of a comfort zone. But interpersonally, and for me, I always think about relationships, whether it's friendships or romantic relationships with a partner. The idea of avoidance here is oftentimes when we are avoiding bringing things up or communicating about things that bother us or made us feel a certain type of way. In romantic relationships, I see this so often, both myself and people I work with, around withholding thoughts or feelings from your partner. And the reason you withhold is a short term positive one. You don't want to hurt the other person. Because I know that if I bring up certain things, it's going to make my partner feel sad or feel ups or get upset or get angry with me. And so what do? You just avoid it. You kind of stick to the 80% or 95% of the relationship that's going great, right? Oh, our routine at night is going great. On the weekends, we have tons of fun going out. But there's this couple of underlying things that I just have been withholding. And that can turn into some serious problems, right?
Yeah, I think one of the main issues is that over time, it builds up resentment. It kind of starts to fester within us. And so long term, it can actually be damaging the relationship because we're not addressing something that, yes, short term, there might be some discomfort, maybe even some tension in the relationship. And there's always the risk that bringing something up new could lead to the ending of the relationship. I mean, that's probably a bit extreme, but I think that's where a lot of our brains go in terms of trying to protect us and the relationship. It's like, hey, let's not bring this up because it's not going to feel good. But then, yeah, over time, it builds up that resentment. And also, we don't get practice then with our partner, with our friends, having these difficult conversations that, yeah, short term are tough, but really help us grow together, feel more connected in the long term.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things that you can physically feel it in a relationship when you let something go unsaid for a while.
Yes.
Because it slowly creates this imbalance where you guys are no longer on the same emotional page because one of you is withholding something, avoiding sharing something, and the other person can sense that, right? When you're in a
Yeah.
relationship, whether it's a friendship or romantic, like you know the other person, you can get a sort of a gut instinctual vibe from them, and when something's off, you know it. Like it's obvious, and it only gets worse the longer you avoid things. But to your point, there is an upshot with sharing, right? Like one of the things that my fiance and I have discovered is that there's no limit to the depth that our relationship can go. And we constantly discover new levels of investment and commitment when we share those things, right? Because it's like, oh, wow, I'm opening another door here of vulnerability where I'm like, oh, this is actually something that I'm afraid of for us, or this is something that makes me anxious. And the challenge with withholding, aside from this long term thing, is that what it's telling your partner when it does eventually come out is that you didn't trust them, right? And that is what can be so enraging, maybe it's a strong word, but it gets somebody really animated. This idea of turning a mountain out of a molehill where you let something go on and on and on, and then you finally bring it up 6 months later, and it's like, "Why didn't you bring this up before if it was so important?" Well, it's because it didn't start as so important. It started as a little thing, and then you just didn't say anything, so now you're being, avoiding sharing how you're feeling and holding something back, which can be perceived as deceptive or mistrusting, which only adds fuel to the fire once that thing does come out.
Yeah. And I think that's an important piece that it sends the message that I don't trust you to, understand where I'm coming from or to hear me out, even if that's not really why you withheld the information. So, for instance, it might be that I don't trust myself, that I would be able to have this conversation in a productive way. Maybe it's something that's going to get me mad. And maybe I've had experiences in the past where I've tried to talk about tough things with a partner, friend, family member, and I haven't been able to do it productively. But even if that's the case, right? Like we're scared that this is going to happen, so we don't share the concern that we have. It can be perceived as we don't trust the other person, and
Right.
that's another key point where a big part of this is avoidance, but there's also some skills and strategies that are important to include in the conversation because the way we share information or concerns that we have is
Mhm.
so critical about does that conversation go well or not. And so, although avoidance is a part of this, there's also ways that we should approach these types of conversations, let's say, that make a big difference. So it's complicated stuff.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want anybody to watch this and think that you should just share everything you're feeling all the time with your partner because that's not necessarily appropriate either. It can lead to being very critical of your partner. One of the things that I've had experiences with, not just with my current partner, but with past roommates too, is in the kitchen. If we're both there at the same time, like you watch the other person do something and they can feel you kind of judging them or worried about them. And so I kind of have this informal rule for myself. It's like, okay, if she's in the kitchen working on something, like I'm going to stay out of there unless she wants me to make this a joint activity because it's very hard for me not to like be worried about something burning someone or somebody cutting their hands just because I've had experiences with that. And so sometimes you need to give that space and try to determine what's a serious issue for you versus what is an idiosyncrasy of your partner or your friend that you just need to accept as part of who they are. And
Yeah,
that's really difficult. And it comes with a lot of practice and just reflection, right?
absolutely. And I think one criteria for that is will this build resentment within me if I don't talk about it? And that's hard to know, but I
Yeah.
think it's an important question to reflect on when deciding, yeah, am I going to talk about the way someone does the dishes? Is
Right.
that
Right.
really
Right.
important to me? Or no, that's something that I can just accept and move on, and it's not going to build resentment.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's move to our third and final bucket here. So we talked about avoidance kind of in the personal realm a little bit, when trying new things or establishing new habits. We talked about it in the context of relationships with not sharing or avoiding sharing thoughts or feelings that might fundamentally lead to larger problems down the road. And then in the professional world, this takes on a whole new kind of form because a lot of times we're in a work environment where we avoid either speaking up for our own ideas, our own perspective, or it can also take the form of avoiding giving feedback to other people around us to try to, if maybe you're managing people, or you have a manager that needs some feedback. And so this is something that I see all the time because I coach a lot of people on their career moves. And part of it is trying to get to this place of understanding it's like positive tension is can be a very, very good thing in the professional environment because it helps, and it's where growth really happens. The question is like, can you do it appropriately? And also, you're not guaranteed in a work environment to get the response that you want, right? It's a little bit more of a toss up, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely can be, I guess, depending on your partner, let's say, or family member or work. And I think that's a key piece to all of this is that there is risk in doing things like sharing our perspective at work or sharing a concern with a
Yeah.
romantic partner.
Yeah.
But yeah, back to like how we do it is really important. Another example in the professional realm is like asking for a raise or a
Mm.
promotion or even applying for a promotion.
Or a job in general.
Sometimes
Yeah.
job in general, yeah, we can, experience the anxiety associated with those kinds of situations and then just avoid it altogether. We can experience, again, the fear of failure. And then because of that, we just want to get the relief from that fear. So we avoid the situation. Um, Plenty of examples. This
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
rears
My
its head
favorite.
all over.
I mean, and you can tell the kind of culture of a place if you go and watch a team meeting and see what happens in the meeting and then hang around for another couple hours after the meeting and see what's happening after. I've been in work environments where in the meeting everybody nods their head, seems to be in agreement, and then I spend the next 3 hours of my day having side conversations with everybody about, "Oh, why are they deciding to do this?" or what's the point of doing that?" or "I don't know why we're pursuing this." And, when you get to that environment, you know that this is an issue, this breakdown in communication. This in the business world, a lot of times we talk about psychological safety. Can the manager, the boss, create a sense of psychological safety where people can push back, they can question, and oftentimes they don't, because we develop weird ways of managing and leading people, which is a whole nother topic. But if you avoid sticking up for yourself or making a play for yourself or sharing your thoughts and feedback, as we all know, it only leads to longer term problems, and missed opportunities, most importantly. So let's put a bow on this conversation by finishing with a few strategies that people might be able to start thinking about or looking into. They might be able to employ, or that you use with your clients or I use with mine when it comes to trying to start tackling these problems of avoidance, whether it's in the personal or the relational or in your professional world.
Yeah, I'm going to start with what I think is the foundational strategy, and it's really just awareness. It is being able to identify when am I acting based on avoidance of short-term distress, uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
Um, because if we can't recognize that we're doing that as a starting place, it's really going to be hard to employ any other strategies to address that.
Yeah.
And so that when it comes to sometimes people don't think of it as a strategy because it's really just identification and awareness,
Yeah.
but it's where we have to start. And a lot of reflection, conversations can help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. One little thing I oftentimes advise people to do is add more pauses into your day. and into your conversations. Because I think in order to identify why you're feeling what you're feeling, you need to stop and explore that feeling a little bit, let it sit, think it through. We have this nature or natural reaction oftentimes to just respond to other people immediately, right? Whether it's a text message you get, an email, in conversation, but even just giving yourself 5, 10 seconds of pause just to process. Like, our brain is a magnificent thing, but it does need time to process, and new things can come out when you give yourself time. I know for me, it's like, especially with things like Slack or other instant communication tools, like, you want to respond to the message instantly, so you kind of get it off your plate. But that can lead to a lot of emotional responses that don't necessarily reflect how you end up thinking and feeling about something later. So absolutely, awareness is number one key. One little thing to try is just to give yourself a moment's pause when experiencing a feeling that's not maybe the most comfortable, and just try to like explore the perspectives and how you're feeling there. Another thing I wanted to mention as a strategy to start thinking about is, and I'm picked up from Atomic Habits, a book by James Clear, very popular book. Um, he talks about, especially if you're trying to establish new habits, new behaviors for yourself, is to first focus on changing your identity, like how you see yourself. And the example he gives was someone who's trying to quit smoking. They have to reframe their identity as not someone who's trying to quit smoking, but now they are a non-smoker. And when you kind of reestablish that identity, so maybe you're a healthy, fit person, or that's like who you are, and that's not framing an exercise goal around weight gain or weight loss or strength gained, or endurance, but it's more about who you are, and that can help guide regular decisions. Like, if you're a healthy and fit person, yeah, you'll choose to work out today because you're a healthy and fit person. That's something you value, right? So getting to that core identity, I think, is also really important. And you can apply that to personal, relational, and career as well. What other strategies do you have that we can leave folks with here?
Well, just build off of what you just said, because at the core of what you're saying highlights the power of how we think about ourselves or the situation.
Yeah.
And I think it's so easy for us to focus on those distressing feelings and the thoughts associated with them. So with the example I gave in the very beginning about trying to like lift weights more
Yes.
and feeling embarrassed when I was in the gym. Um, there's thoughts around there like, oh, I'm too skinny. People are going to be looking at me funny. I don't fit in. Um, but that's only part of the story. Is there a way for me to also generate and start focusing on other thoughts that actually are aligned with the long-term goal? So
Mhm.
maybe it's something like, yeah, I'm not super comfortable in this environment, but I know each day I lift weights, it's getting me closer and closer to the strength goals that I have.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that the discomfort is just going to go away, but it's
Right.
more about where do we put our focus and do we accept and allow some of this discomfort as we focus on the longer term goals that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. To continue on that point around, because you're right. There's sort of this myth in the world of popular psychology, I think, around managing and mastering your emotions, and this idea that like one day you're just not going to feel the bad ones, and that's just not the case. It just never will be the case. And so, to your point, though, it's like, okay, part of this is preparing yourself for when those feelings of discomfort arise, because you know when they're going to arise. And something that I work with a lot of people on is trying to reframe the physical feelings you're experiencing and turn them from a negative, counterproductive thing that you fear to a positive sort of energy source that you can tap into. I'll give you a personal example. So I, used to pre-COVID used to attend like a lot of events, or there'd be speakers or panels, and I always, oftentimes have questions that come up that I'm curious and I want to participate. And so when they open for Q&A, I would try to push myself to use that as an opportunity. to engage, and things come out of that. But I would develop this feeling anytime I knew that I was about to raise my hand or go up to the microphone, all of a sudden my heart would start racing, right? And first I took it as like, oh, this is a horrible feeling. I'm not going to do this. But as I grew older and realized how much value and joy I really get out of participating or public speaking, those things, like that's something I really enjoy. Um, Whenever I feel that feeling, I know, and I take it as a signal that I'm about to do something worthwhile. I'm about to like put myself out there and kind of get that rush of living in the moment. And so it still sticks with me to this day. I've in from being a teacher, doing workshops in public, I've spoken in front of groups all the time, and I still get that rush. But I've turned it into a fuel and an energy source. And I think the same can be said for when you're anxious about trying something new. You can look at that physical feeling and try to mentally grab onto it and see if it can't give you a rush of energy just to kind of block out worrying about those perceptions that people might have of you, just like pushing into it, right? And using that to kind of push the throttle down and add whatever other metaphors you want to add into here. But I think it could be a really powerful thing, reframing your feelings of discomfort into feelings of anticipation, feelings of excitement, and ultimately feelings that you can then associate with growth, versus with fear and embarrassment, reluctance, all those things.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, these are like physiological experiences that we have in our body, and the way that we interpret those experiences makes a big difference. Am I telling myself, "Oh my gosh, I'm so nervous," or am I telling myself, "Oh my gosh, I'm kind of excited to have this opportunity"?
Yeah.
It's to me, I don't want to give the impression that it's kind of like tricking ourselves, because it's not. It's this is an experience we're having. My heart's beating faster. It's how can I understand this, or how can I describe this experience in a way that's helpful for me? It's going to get me
Yeah.
closer to that long-term
And
goal.
it's not tricking yourself, it's training yourself. And there is a difference, right? And again, going back to kind of neural pathways in the brain that we sort of started this conversation with, the more you encourage yourself or reframe these feelings in a different way, the more that neural pathway gets carved out and gets cemented, which is why now my automatic response is not one of fear to participating in front of a crowd, but is one of anticipation. But it takes repetitions, right? And that's one of the things that's so powerful about psychology versus, physical exercise. Doing mental reps takes no energy, right? You just have to, it takes attention and it takes intention. And so with that, I want to close with one final strategy that, or it's more of just like a broader point that I think is helpful for folks. A lot of times we sit around waiting for motivation to strike, right? It's like I got to find the right time where I feel the most confident to ask for that raise, or the most motivated to pick up this new hobby or sign up for that class. And there was a great book called by Mark Mance, I think it is, like The Art of Not Giving a F, where he actually talks about this, and I've seen it in other things as well. And his basic point was people think that motivation leads to action, but in reality, it's the reverse. Action leads to motivation. And so as soon as you take that first action, you'll start seeing the benefits of it or feeling that experience, and it can lead to more motivation. And so actually waiting around, as you've probably already found out, is only going to lead to more waiting around. Whereas taking an action, even if it's you want to write a book, just start writing, right? Or start writing what somebody else wrote. You want to get into drawing or painting, just starting to do it. We hear this all the time, but psychology and science really backs this up too. It's about training yourself to just act first and then really relish in that experience, which is what you know conjures up that motivation the next time around.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like to think of it as they both influence each other. If you have the motivation, it will lead to action or positively contribute to it. And that's great. But it's when we don't have that motivation, we still have power. We still can choose to act and then create that motivation, which is going to fuel us, working towards our long term goal in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I appreciate you taking the time here, Dr. Seitz. This has been a wide-ranging, quick conversation around the topic of avoidance. There's obviously so much more we could unpack here, and we might in future conversations, but hopefully this gives folks a high-level look at what avoidance is, where it's showing up, and really the importance of trying to investigate it and power through it when and where you can. There's a lot more strategies. We went through reframing, thinking about your identity. We went through action leads to motivation. I know I'm missing some here, but hopefully people find this conversation helpful, and we'll dive into some more topics in the future. But I want to appreciate and thank you, Scott, for the time. And this is we don't have a title for these conversations, but coach and therapist talking to each other. I think it's always a fruitful experience. So appreciate you, and hope people will get something out of this. But we'll see
Absolutely.
you next time.
Yep. Thanks, y'all.